The city of Sheffield, once a bustling hub of activity and community, fell silent as the COVID-19 pandemic swept across the globe, leaving its mark on this proud Yorkshire city, and its impact could be felt in every corner.
My story of COVID is very, very much linked to my family. So my daughter, who is resident in Nigeria, born here, a UK citizen, but married to a Nigerian, now lives in Nigeria, was here, and it happened to be around the time when she was having a baby. So she was about 8 months pregnant when the COVID crisis started.
Like today, and a weather like this, hundreds of people would have been here at the Peace Garden sunbathing, including children playing at this water fountain behind me. But as you can see today, like many other places in the city centre and areas of Sheffield, this place is deserted, and this is set to continue until further notice. I work as a journalist, and also the place where I work at Sheffield Live is regarded as a community media organisation. So in that case, I had to come to work. And when the lockdown happened, children were not allowed to go to school. After a month, some children were allowed to go back to school. That is for those children whose parents were classed as key workers, and also those children who were seen as vulnerable children. So during that time, my child having autism, it was a bit difficult for us as a family. Especially him, going to school, the route that he used to take or the entrance, it was all changed, a school setting. They had to be standing on queues, and also the entrances were changed. He was not allowed to play with his friends. And as someone who has got autism, it's very difficult for him to understand. And when changes happens, it's also very, very difficult for him to adopt, because they are used to kind of like routines. So when he's used to a routine, he has to stick to that.
For many, the pandemic was a time of isolation, fear and loss. Families were kept apart, jobs were lost, and loved ones were taken too soon.
COVID really impacted me personally because, one, obviously it impacted my studies for sure. I was at the point where I was doing what you call like field research, and because of COVID-19, I just couldn't do that. So I had to completely change my planned method of studies, and I know that impacted thousands of students across the UK and across the world. On a more personal level, my mother at that time was in a care home, and although obviously she was of an age and quite unwell, and she herself did not contract COVID, obviously that situation obviously impacted our ability to connect with our mother. And others as well. So, it was a very personally impacted us. And also because of COVID, I had to move a number of times just because of changing family situations. So that added to stress. And also just trying to move, the logistics of moving is stressful anyway, but when you add in COVID, it just makes things really, really difficult. And also trying to study and things like that. So it was a really, really difficult time. And it impacted my own personal health, physical health, and obviously mental well-being. And I feel like I'm just getting to the stage where I'm coming out of that kind of difficult period now, but it's taken a good 18 months for me to feel like I'm back on a healthier keel.
It was very scary at the beginning, because when we started hearing about COVID, I had just come back home from visiting my family in South Africa, in Cape Town. And then we went into lockdown, and I feared the worst for Africa, for my parents back home, for my children back in South Africa, and just feared because there was a lot of things that were not known about COVID. And I thought if things are this bad over here, where some of the systems work better than they do back home in Zimbabwe, what's going to happen to my friends, to my family, to the people of my country? So the first few months of knowing about COVID and being in a lockdown were really scary. Also because one of my fears or one of my anxieties is around not being able to go back home. So I thought if we are stuck here and they are stuck there, and I might never see them again. So it was really scary the first few months.
COVID affected me. I have 4 boys. One of them was in university and obviously on a lockdown at a university. The other 3 children, we were homeschooling them. I also was a student doing my master's and being a counselor as well and doing everything on Zoom. How did it affect us? It affects us dramatically in the way that we do things as a family, in the obviously emotionally and mental health and well-being, but also the fact that the financially it affected us as well because my husband had to stop working. As a mum of very young children, having children in a 3-bedroom house and actually making it out of a high school and primary school was difficult, and to have my postgraduate education as well as my other work, council work. So COVID was difficult, especially if you lived in a very small area or a very small house.
Well, our family split between London and Sheffield. So during that time, during the lockdown period, a couple of my relatives, we moved back to Sheffield just so we could be closer to our mother, because the logistics of traveling on the trains because of COVID, it wasn't safe. We didn't feel safe traveling on the train, and also because of the restrictions, it was like there was as we had more and more lockdowns and things, they tried to get things back to quote normal. It was hard to understand what was the restrictions. Could you travel? Could you not travel? And all these kinds of things. So that's where the kind of disruption in the moving. It was really to be closer to our mother, so we didn't have to be stressed out by the train situation. So it's been interesting being back in Sheffield during that time. For me personally, I've not lived in the city for such an extended period of time since when I was a child, ostensibly. And obviously the city's changed so much since then. But some things haven't changed, but I guess that's a different conversation for another time.
Yeah, I mean, that had a huge impact as well because we had a show, we had a production that was meant to happen at Sheffield Theatres just before the pandemic, and that show had to be cancelled, which meant that we lost almost £60,000. The company lost almost £60,000 as a result of not being able to go ahead with that project. And even when we then had the lockdown lifted and then we were able to put that show on, the show was put on hold again when the second lockdown came. So again, we ended up, we lost more money, but also it's the fact that we then spent all that time coming into to a space to put something together, and just 2 days after the show opened to the public, everything was shut down again, and all the actors had to, can you imagine, you spend like 4 weeks making something and you don't even have the opportunity to show it to the public. So that show had to be watched online luckily we recorded the show and a lot of people had the opportunity to experience it online. But yes, we lost money, but we also lost the momentum that the company was on for its growth. And yeah, I think it's by His grace really that we managed to survive it and get to where we are today.
It was very difficult because where I live, I live in a place where I needed to be careful for the other people that live around me. So it meant that I was isolated because my family are back home. I live by myself. So there were days that I didn't see anybody else. So I was just sitting up in my bedsit with my thoughts and nothing else and nobody else around, and like I said, just imagining the very worst of any situation. So it was really a time when I had to call on all my resources to keep positive, or even to just try to think other positive.
Healthcare workers were on the front lines of the battle against the virus, putting their lives at risk to care for the sick and the dying.
I think it just made us really realize how lucky we've been before the pandemic, because you take a lot of things for granted, and something as simple as giving birth became something that we were thinking, oh my God, we must start preparing ourselves for whether we're going to have, whether this child will be born at home, whether we would have to do. So we started teaching ourselves all sorts of things online in case there are no facilities even for Adeshola to go to the hospital to go and have the baby. And yeah, for us, it was just a lot of anxiousness around my son, my youngest son being stuck in America. My husband was back, he was in London. In fact, he traveled to Africa and he couldn't come back in, and all of those challenges were happening.
But amid the darkness, there were moments of hope and resilience. People came together to support one another, and the city rallied to fight back against the virus.
Well, we were told for them to be in school at 8 o'clock. So one thing I did was to make sure we are there like for some time at 7:30, so that we get used to the environment, and also we get the time of passing around the area, so that I would say, Ibrahim, this is where we're going to be using, this is the entrance now. Repeat that constantly to him for him to understand the under entrance is short, and also they have to stand on the queues, and also processing that to understand to stand on the queue was very, very difficult for him, because for him he was used to playing with the kids. So, and as soon as he comes, they will say, no, you have to stand on that queue and you have to social distance. So it was very, very difficult for him to process that. But through the trials and errors, he got used to it, through us repeating it to him constantly. This is where you have to stand. So myself or my missus had to be making sure we are stood next to him all the time. When he wants to move, then we will hold him. And it was also difficult, some parents as well, who couldn't understand that he is a child, and also he's got autism. So with the stigma sometimes, the way people look at it, why is this child not behaving? So those were all very, very challenging time, because during normal time, people do understand that he's got autism, but not everyone knows the way things are. So when those changes happen, so everybody, it's either people look at you in a way as if thinking your child is not disciplined, or those who understand that he's got special needs, some will sympathize with you, and some as well will look at you in a funny way.
The people of Sheffield showed the world that even in the toughest of times, the spirit could not be broken.